Ngoa. My submissions today address the changes to the birth registrations, and essentially my submission is that the proposed changes and perhaps even the current position is not fit for purpose, and that there's too much information, and rather it should be a science-based registration. The purpose of the Act includes providing a source of important health information and statistical data. For medical and health purposes, a gender or nominated sex category is irrelevant. Medical treatment is not based on gender. In scientific terms, each person has a combination of X or Y sex chromosomes. This is an important medical and statistical data, like age and sex of a patient is the important thing. And the reference to male or female, M or F, represents a reference to the X or Y chromosome combination of a person. The proposed changes, and perhaps even the current legislation, introduces and allows medical risk for a non-scientific subjective classification that's not based on fact. And this would create perhaps potentially a dangerous and harmful medical risk. For instance, if a patient were to present with severe abdominal pains during an emergency who says they are male, they would not be immediately considered for a life-threatening condition such as ectopic pregnancy. So knowing the true sex, XX or XY, male or female, at times is incredibly important, and obscuring facts could lead to fatal error. And this may be an improbable, but it's not an impossible scenario. I submit that the purpose of the birth certificates is to record correct, objective, unique, identifying information about a person. It should be factual, scientific data and not a self-assessed perception, which may be unreliable and can be changeable. The birth certificate should record a person as having chromosomes X or Y. And as we have seen, there's plenty of examples overseas of what happens when people ignore science and facts and they rely on perceptions. And I note the terms mother and father seem to have now perhaps become old-fashioned or irrelevant. Like the term mother or birth mother generally referred to the person with whom the fetus was located during gestation. So perhaps a more neutral or suitable description or term could be created by perhaps incubating parent. And maybe mother and father more correctly could be referred to as the contributor of the X or the Y gametes. I submit the proposed changes are not consistent with the purpose of the Acts, and they will perpetuate inaccurate records and increase administration and bureaucracy. Amongst other things, statutory declarations that we need from children and who need to understand consequences of nominations and checks again at 18 years old. So I submit that the system is in fact self-limiting, because for myself, I have to identify what I identify personally as, I believe, is a private issue that shouldn't be irrelevant to my employment or how I am treated in a government department or health information, for instance. If the government wants to collect or store that kind of information, it should be done elsewhere and not here. If it did collect that information, it would be relatively worthless and unreliable, possibly not up to date. And again, there is obviously an information and privacy risk in storing this kind of information. To those of you who support the bill's changes, I say to you, a piece of paper, your birth certificate, does not define who you are, or does not limit who you can be, and you are worth more than a piece of paper or a classification. You are beautiful, you are beloved, you are wonderfully and fearfully made, and there are good plans for your life, better than anything you could dream or think or ask. The bill, as it is currently drafted, will in fact make things harder and more inflexible if the law continues in the way that the bill's drafted. It will become out of date and antiquated. Social values and thinking terminology changes over time. And over time, the current law and the proposals will become self-limiting and rigid. I submit that the birth certificate should just contain scientific, unchangeable data about a person, not a variable or self-assessed perception. And in fact, if you really want to make sure that children are unfettered in their self-determination, that would be so. People change, you will change, and you will become stronger and wiser. And so I submit that the data on the birth certificates should one day could one day be self-limiting if the law was to change in the way that you propose. Māti atua, koi e manaki. I submit the changes are not well thought out, that overall Part 2, Subpart 7, there needs to be rethoughts, revamped, revised to achieve the Act's intended purposes. Thank you. Those are my submissions.
Hey, thank you, Christine. You put your submission in a most eloquent manner. Deborah.
Oh, thank you, Christine. You've laid quite an emphasis on science. May I ask, do you have a background in science?
I have sufficient to understand the basic concepts. I would hesitate to call myself an expert.
So does that mean you have a degree in science?
What is the relevance of that question?
I'm asking the question. So you've laid a lot of emphasis on science. Do you have qualifications in science?
No, actually I have a law degree.
So in that case, you might be interested to read Scientific American.
No, Deborah, this
I won't be silenced, Ian.
This is not our position to give lectures on.
You may not silence me, Ian. You may not silence me. Where it shows that in actual fact, sex expression is not just an XX or an XY, but it's mediated by other genes as well. So there's actually no clear scientific basis of birth other than what someone looks like. You can't access what someone looks like at birth doesn't show what the underlying chromosomes are.
Certainly not. Perhaps DNA is probably the most conclusive way of determining whether or not someone is XX or XY. Again, not everyone will, I mean, DNA tests are $2,000 and takes time. You couldn't submit every single baby to that. But I have confidence that a medical practitioner could probably have a fairly accurate guess of the chromosome typing by a quick examination of genitalia of the newborn.
No, it doesn't show XXY.
Thank you, Christine. I'm going to call the submission to a close now. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for making the submission and taking the time to come and see us today. It's very good. Thank you.